Good afternoon. This is CIVE633, Environmental Hydrology, and this is fall 2021 semester here at San Diego State University, Department of Civil Engineering. And the subject we're going to cover today is continuing with groundwater sustainability. We already have discussed this subject the last week, and this is the last class of the semester, basically. Next week we have student presentations on topics that they have chosen on my recommendation. So we'll get going in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen. Let me see if I can get this thing going here. Sharing the screen, I believe we're fine in here. Are we okay here? Do we have a green color in there? A page which is a green color?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. You wonder why so much green? Well, this color in here is the flagship color of the Visual Lab. From the beginning, we chose two colors among the 256 million colors on the web. We chose two. This green, and there's a little bit orangey in there. So we are going to review today we're supposed to review 4 papers. The last papers on the list. But to be honest with you, I don't think we're going to get there. So I thought I put the least important paper. They're all important, but the one that I could basically not cover is the last one on our experience in the Ojos Negros Basin. That is kind of a shame because that is a very nice and very good project. I spent 7 years working in that area from the year 1999 to the year 2005 or 6. But no, let me go back. So there's 4 papers. The first work this is not a paper. The subject is Some Facts About Sawyer Spring in Ash Creek Surface Water Groundwater Interactions. I wrote this and I put the name of Gary Player in there, Gary F. Player. Gary Player is a very common name, apparently. I've met at least a couple of Gary Players in the past. Okay, who is this gentleman, Gary Player? In the year 2007, I believe it was, he wrote to me out of the blues. And he introduced himself and he wanted to thank me for putting on the web, putting online these articles and various pieces of information that I had worked on since the year 2005, 2006. This was 2007. It was fresh on the web. And basically what he told me was the following. He had to do a presentation, I believe, in the state of Utah. He lives in Utah. I believe it's Cedar City, or southwestern Utah. He had to give a presentation in some agency out there in the state of Utah, and on the subject on sustainability of groundwater. And he went on the web and he found me and he found the stuff I had put together. And he basically thanked me because he said that I had simplified his work because he was going to research it, but he figured it's already been done by Professor Ponce. So he basically asked for my permission to copy some of the stuff that I had put together on the issue of groundwater sustainability, which we have already reviewed, by the way, 2 or 3 articles or pieces of work. And he went ahead, and of course, I gave him my permission. I give my permission to just anybody that asks me. That many people do that, by the way. And I just give my permission. I figure it's the property of the state of California, not mine, because I'm an employee of the state of California. And all this stuff is just putting all together. As you know, there's a few things that we developed, but like, for instance, the S-curve. I consider the S-curve mine, but that's just an exception. But anyway, so that's Gary Player. And he was very nice. After we did that, we became friends. We correspond with Gary. And he was very nice to share with me his work on the Ash Creek in Utah. Sawyer Spring and Ash Creek. He had done some work. He was a consulting geologist. So he was doing groundwater work. As you know, in the issue of groundwater, there's an interface, or I guess interaction, between geologists and civil engineers. Civil engineers also get into groundwater. Now, geographers do, but you heard me talk about that before. they are kind of limited. So in the sense is that the groundwater professionals or the geologists are the professionals, but there's engineering parts of that, and that's why where civil engineers like myself get in there. And so this is a project, this is a fascinating, interesting project. I was lucky that he identified me, the Gary Player identified me on the web and was willing to share with me his work. Otherwise, I would not have had any way of gaining direct access to this work because he never published it. And I'll tell you later why. It was a political thing, so it was difficult to publish. It was not really scientific, it was political. What is political? Politics is the art of this is mine and that's not yours, or vice versa. It's a argument between two people or two entities as to what belongs to them. That is really the essence of politics. And that's exactly what's going to happen in here. So we have in here the local situation. I'm going to try to spend 15 minutes on this, by the way. We already spent half of the time. So I'm going to speed up in here. This is the geographical situation. We have in here Sawyer Spring. You see my mouse in here? Sawyer Spring connects with Ash Creek. Okay? And in the year 1993, I believe, this property in here was purchased by the LDS Church. It was a large area. They have a lot of resources. Okay? And they started pumping. They pumped here on this well B. And they got to the point where they were pumping 1,700 gallons per minute. 1,700 gallons per minute. And of course, that dried out Ash Creek. And at the time, they didn't realize that Mr. Whitehead, I know it's not Whitehead, it's Whitehead. Here, Whitehead, it says Whitehead home. Here is Whitehead's home. Whitehead owned this property over here. I believe Whitehead's property was 300 acres. And he farmed for many years, since the 80s he was farming. And what happened was that Ash Creek dried out. So Whitehead owned the water, the surface water. The entire surface water in the western United States have been allocated a portion to private individuals or institutions. So Whitehead owned the water. Whitehead basically owned, I believe it was the entire flow, it's written in there, the entire flow of Ash Creek or something, a large percentage of it. So when these other people started pumping, the flow diminished. Within 6 months, it was starting to diminish and then eventually disappeared. So Whitehead, of course, I hope I'm pronouncing his name Whitehead. He didn't have any water, so he was uptight about it. Eventually, he sued. It took a long while, by the way. This whole system was resolved in the year 2007. And the origination of the project of pumping Ash Creek originated, I believe, in 1993. I'm going to read the story for you because it's very explicit in here. All these things that I say in here are facts communicated to me by Gary Player. They've never been published. And the reason why they've never been published is because when they settled, I believe they settled out of court after a legal fight that took 5 years. I believe it was 2000 to 2005 or 2007. They settled out of court, or when they settled, they finally, one of the conditions of the settlement was that Whitehead was going to get his water back, but he was not supposed to talk about it. They really basically muzzled everybody. I asked Gary Player if I could write it out on a report. It was important. From a standpoint of groundwater utilization, it actually confirmed what we have been saying all along, that if you pump groundwater next to a river, you will dry the river out. If you pump a whole lot, which these guys did. So he was confirming. And to my knowledge, there had not been an explicit case study in the literature on this subject. So I figured I could benefit from it by telling the story, even though it was not my story, but I would share it with Gary. Of course, he was the originator of the data, but he told me that I couldn't do it. So the only thing I've done is talked about it in class. So it's published, but it's published in a very limited situation. I have not been called upon to shut up, by the way. And I'm thinking that it's not going to happen. It's been a number of years. This is 2007, 2008. By the way, this is not the first time that's happened to me. A couple or three other times, we have been, I guess you could say, muscled, I guess the word, covered. We cannot talk about the subject because it's conflictive. It creates a lot of conflict. We had a project in Tijuana where this thing happened. Also, we couldn't document, we couldn't do anything. Okay, Sawyer Spring, tributary of Ash Creek. Sawyer Spring and Ash Creek drain a shallow alluvial aquifer and the fractured bedrock aquifer of the Pine Valley Mountains to the west. Since 1986, Mr. Bruce Whitehead has been farming 300 acres of land. He owns the water rights to all the surface flow of Sawyer Spring and a portion of Ash Creek. These rights, by the way, there's several wells in here that were put together by LDS. Here it is, one well in red, another well. Two red wells. The pumping, the production wells. 2.18 CFS in Sawyer Creek and 7 in Ash Creek. The LDS Church owns the property upstream of Widest Farm in the vicinity of Sawyer Spring. The perimeter is shown in red color. The location of Mr. Whitehead's home, I already shown you the location. In 1993, the LDS Church drilled a 6-inch exploratory well, and then they found water at a depth of, no, the well A was drilled to a depth of 400 feet. Well A and well B drilled to a depth of 600 feet. At the time of drilling, the depth of the water table varied between 40 and 70 feet. So it was not on the surface, it was deep. 40 feet is kind of deep, right? It's normal, by the way. It's normal in the Western United States. Remember, our friend that did a study, I forget right now the name, 1927 study that said that the average depth of groundwater in the Western United States was 27 feet. This is 40, 70 feet. It's in the ballpark. Okay. They pumped continuously at 750 gallons per minute, and then they increased it to 1,700 in 1997. The drawdown from this rate of discharge has eliminated surface flow. Flow in Ash Creek began to diminish. Sawyer Spring was perennial until the year 1993. And in 1993, they started pumping. So it was perennial until the year 1993. Since 1993, Sawyer Spring has become intermittent or has been reduced in volume. The same thing, and we've seen this happen many places around the world, by the way. Well, I'm not saying around the world, the places I worked, in the 20 countries I worked. Okay, lawsuit. 2003, Bruce Whitehead sued the LDS, right? So I'm wrong on the time, so I thought it was 2000. No, it's 2003 to 2008, because Gary told me that there were 5 years in litigation. So the riparian trees had been adversely affected. There's pictures of that, the dead riparian trees. I do not know whether the dead trees died completely or recovered. I know enough of the subject to think that when a tree dies, it dies. It can't recover. You'll have some of the trees growing eventually, but it will take a while for them to reach their size. In October 2007, after the lawsuit, the LDS Church stopped pumping at well B, and base flow within 6 months, base flow resumed. And I have a picture that Gary told me where the Sawyer Spring and Ash Creek were flowing back. And they installed a measuring device so that they could make sure that it had cover or returned back to the way it was. To date, May 18, pumping at well B has not been resumed. Meaning, this means that LDS was forced to shut down their pumping operations because they were too close to the river. They were affecting the river. That's the story, and it's a true story. The day we published this paper is in 2008, May 29. It's a true story that basically we're not supposed to talk about. But within limits, we can do that. Like I said, we have not been taken to task yet. Okay, now the next paper is important because you're going to do the last homework based on this paper. It's not going to take you a whole lot of time, I don't think so, and I'm encouraging you not to spend a lot of time on this, and I know you are not going to because we have a lot of work coming up. The exam is coming up. By the way, I do want to say that I am going to, either today or tomorrow, I'm going to give you a subset of the reading like I've done in the past. Meaning of all the papers that are in the syllabus, maybe 60% of them would be recommended for reading during these days. The others are secondary, and since I'm not gonna query on it, then I wanna make sure you concentrate on, you focus on the material. So I'm going to give you a list of, as I've done in the past, by the way. So those of you that have taken classes with me before, I'm going to do that. I would say 60% of the papers will be recommended. That means that the remaining 40%, I'm not going to ask you any questions on the exam about the remaining 40%. Okay. And another thing I do want to say that I will prepare the exam, and then no, the exam's going to be prepared in the next few days. But in order to do that, I have to, actually, I take that back. In order for me to restrict the reading, I have to prepare the exam. So in the next couple of days, I will do that. And that's basically it, what I'm going to say today about this. Okay, introduction. Uh, some of the subjects that I'm going to be covering in these three papers that I'm going to be looking at today have already been repeated or have already been mentioned. So when I find something that I think you must have already heard about it, then I will just kind of skip it or go lightly on it. Okay. The question of how much water to pump still remains sustainable has no straightforward answer. Um, at first, one would think that it's a hydrogeologic problem. We certainly do not think that. We think that the sustainability of groundwater is not hydrogeology. It has to do with hydrology and has to do with ecology, of which I'm sorry to tell you this, that the straight hydrogeologist practitioners do not know or have very little knowledge of it. And why should they? They're not hydrologists. They're not ecologists, right? Uh, it takes it takes a lot of effort and so forth to become an interdisciplinary person. And while there are people that are interdisciplinary, it's really not recommended. The idea is to have a team of people that are solving the problem, because you have a hydrogeologist, a hydrologist, and a geologist, and they kind of work together and they reach consensus in the analysis of the problems, because otherwise it's not going to happen. I remember I told you this, that many years ago I had a friend who had exhausted the surface water in his basin and he was going to go after the groundwater. And I said, just make sure, he was a friend and a former student. I said, just make sure that when you hire the groundwater geologists will hire a team of other people that are not groundwater geologists to go with it. Otherwise, they're going to mess up. I said, it's just the way it is. It's in the nature. It's happened before. Okay. So in the past 2 decades, it has become patently clear that the sustainability of an aquifer has little to do with its hydrogeologic properties. And by the way, I didn't say that. It was Ali in 1999. We learned a lot from Ali, by the way. When I didn't decide. When I was hired to do the work for East County in the year 2005, I reviewed the literature, and the first paper that came out was Ali's et al. And I read it 2, 3, 4 times, however it was necessary, however much it was necessary to understand what he had said and apply it. We'll go back to thighs, and we already talked about this. Thighs. In fact, this statement that in here, I have already read it to you, so I'm going to skip it. Groundwater flow explained. This figure is very a figure that depicts the process. Groundwater is always in movement, which is what Thies said. Don't forget that Thies is considered to be the father of American hydrogeologists. He wrote that famous paper, or seminal paper actually, 1941. Groundwater is always moving from the place of origin or recharge to the place of discharge. Presumably it gets either base flow or to the ocean. And we know from the studies of Leibovich that 98% of the groundwater exits as base flow. And 2% does not exit. It exits deeper. We can't really reach because it's deep, only 2%. Now, we do realize that Leibovich said it was between 0 and 5%. And then he said 2%, 1.5%, 2% sounds like a very good number in the ballpark. So if one wanted to pin that number down, you'd have to do a study. But I'm cautioning it is a very difficult study to do. because it gets deep, the water gets deep. Who's going to start talking about the water deep in the ground? I mean, it can go anywhere. We don't know exactly what's happening deep in the ground. We can guess all kinds of stuff, but we don't know. Okay. Um, and particularly since the alluvial aquifers have a tendency to be very well behaved according to laws of physics. But the rock aquifers, no, anything could happen in a rock aquifer, basically. But because the water is not diffusive, rather it is convective. The flow of water is not by diffusion processes, which are slow and generalized. Rather, it is convective, which are fast and local. So you can't really tell. Uh, Hydrogeologists say that they could do it, but I really honestly don't think so. There's a whole lot of literature on this subject as to how good can we as a profession, or can groundwater geology as a profession assess what's actually happening out there in the ground, deep in the ground, when the ground is formed of rock and fractures. The fractures can go in any direction. So modeling groundwater flow in a fractured aquifer must be a nightmare. I've never done it. Okay, so this subject in here, figure 3, we already done. So I'm going to skip it. In I'm sorry, it was figure 2. Figure 4, figure 4 is, I think we already done this, but let me just stress what we're saying in here. We have the control volume, and I do stress at the point that, at this point, the control volume is something that is very fuzzy in hydrogeology, because technically there is no limit to the size of the control volume. If you start pumping in a place and you pump continuously forever, you will dry everything. You will simply dry everything. Okay? Nobody's ever done it, but it can be done. People have tried doing this theoretically. So we have the capture recharge, the natural recharge, and the capture recharge in excess of the natural recharge. And in the discharge, the capture discharge is the one that goes back, and the residual is the one that continues on, because you cannot capture all of it. You capture most of it, but not all of it. Then the deep percolation that was studied by Leibovitz. Then we have the capture in blue here, and then the vertical recharge. The vertical recharge, if you have a large area in there, you're going to have recharge by precipitation, by recharge of groundwater. There's artificial recharge. There's programs or projects of artificial recharge in many places around California, certainly in California. California is trying to ameliorate its groundwater sustainability issues by doing recharge projects. And plus the precipitation, you also have the irrigation return. You got to apply water in excess of what the plants are going to use, and the excess is going to go down eventually to drain out. That depends, actually. If you drain it out quickly, then it doesn't go to deep percolation. But it's still vertical recharge, so you got to consider it within the balance. Sustainable use of groundwater. One of the issues here shown by this picture is that there are waters that are consumed, like irrigated agriculture, and others that are not. Other uses for irrigation, other uses for water, like potable use and stuff, could return. The water could be returned. Changed, of course, modified, but it can be returned. In the case of irrigated agriculture, we have a classical example. I love this picture of a channel going on the left is going in this direction toward us, and on the channel on the right is the drainage, which is about a sixth or a seventh of the flow, which is going further, and that's going into the Colorado. So this water over here on the left is being pumped from the Colorado upstream, and this water is being drained by gravity into the Colorado, eventually going into Mexico, the Colorado River. This is the project, Welton Mohawk project, which was created in the 1940s and 1950s in Welton, Arizona. We talked about that already. The cybernetic water balance. This is Leibovitz's work. Leibovitz was a Russian gentleman who in 1979 published, a hydrologist, who in 1979 published a paper which was a very, is instrumental in making us understand how things work. Nature is cybernetic. Nature is not cause-effect. Nature never did anything that was cause-effect, because the purpose of nature was to persevere, to promote life in all its forms. And you cannot do that with a cause-effect, because with a cause-effect, things will die out and destroy themselves. With cybernetic, no, because in a cybernetic mechanism, when a system goes on the left too much, then it tries to go on the right. And then if it goes on the right too much, it tries to go on the left. It kind of self-controlled process. And if you're not familiar with these subjects, I can tell you this. Do you guys drive a bicycle? And you're going to say, yes, I learned early when I was 7 years old to drive a bicycle. My dad and my parents bought a bicycle. Okay. And you, of course, didn't know how to ride a bicycle. But you learned. After 3 times that you fell, you learned how to drive a bicycle. Driving a bicycle is a cybernetic mechanism because you're going straight and you're not falling left or right because you are able to control it. The same thing can be said about skiing, by the way. So cybernetics is everywhere. And Leibovitz is a cybernetic process. We, unfortunately, we meaning classical hydrology, did not look at the Leibovitz issues. So I want you to review, we're going to review this next year, by the way, extensively. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. But at this point, I want you to review this for what it's worth, spend the time that is necessary, okay, because we're going to come back next year and review it again. For those of you that have not taken hydrology, I recommend that you take 634 next year with me in the fall. And I'm also going to teach sedimentation. Interestingly, those 2 classes are going to be the last classes that Professor Ponce teaches here at San Diego State after 43 years. It will be 43 years when I retire next year, finally, or definitively. Okay, so this is the calculation of Leibovitz, but here we've added the wetting coefficient. Leibovitz presented the runoff coefficient, and I, in one of our calculations, presented the base flow. I believe Leibovitz also presented the base flow. Leibovitz presented the runoff coefficient, which everybody knows the runoff coefficient is the runoff of the precipitation. The base flow coefficient, then we introduced in here the wetting coefficient, for those that are interested in figuring out how much wetting is it, and then the groundwater recharge. We introduced the groundwater recharge here. That's the basis of this particular paper in here, how to calculate the groundwater recharge coefficient. We were able to determine the U, which goes into the base flow, the flow that goes into the base flow, it does not return through evaporation. Because the thing is that when water percolates into the ground, it can go all the way to the groundwater deeply, or it can surface back into evapotranspiration and evaporation, depending on the geomorphology. That's why we say geomorphology is extremely important. And that's why I wrote that paper called The Case for Geomorphology, because I feel that geomorphology is the answer to all our problems, because it encompasses geology and hydrology and ecology together. So we have examples in here how the calculations that were done by Leibovitz, these are calculations that were done by ourselves on the data of Leibovitz. And then we have an example application. We use data from a friend of us in Andhra Pradesh, just because we had it handy. We did this 4 or 5 years ago. And what happened was that we had already done the table with the 2 first case of U and case of R. And all we needed to do was add a couple more things to the calculator and calculate case of W and case of G. That was easy for us to do. We already done 2/3 of the work, right? So we did that. So I've given you some data, and for you to have a taste of how this is done and think about it and do the calculation, and you will run the calculator. Do not do Excel. Run the calculator. Because if you run the calculator, you'll do it in 20, 30 minutes. If you run in Excel, it depends on how good are you with Excel. I don't want to get into that. That's a discussion that I'd rather not get into. Recharge coefficients and sustainable yield. Same thing. Same thing. The cybernetic balance described here, the cybernetic balance of Leibovitz. It is interesting that how is it that only in 1979, it's only been 40 years since we know this. This is interesting. I can't answer that question. All I know is that there's a classical hydrology, water balance, water balance of classical hydrology, which, by the way, is written and described in my book, written in '89. And then later, when I found out about Leibovitz, then I said to myself, well, what the heck, I got to fix my book. And of course, my book never got fixed. None of the others either. Okay? How did I run into Leibovitz? By luck. They invited me to go to India, And I went to the library because I had a lot of time, and I ran into Leibovich's book, which for some reason I had not run before. So it was after 1991 that I went to India for the first time that I learned about Leibovich. When I read Leibovich, it was an eye-opener. He was talking about things that I didn't know. Okay, so at this point, of course, what we're doing, since we're not rewriting the book, it's just like that. This is supposed to be graduate study. It's not undergraduate study. We published a paper on this, and we said in our paper, in our defense or arguing that we were doing the right thing, is that we were going to be able to solve the problem of double counting in the water balance. There's a double counting problem. And I wrote that and I said that, yeah, we're going to solve the double counting. And one of the reviewers said that precisely. He says, Professor Ponce is right. There is some double counting and there are some problems with the conventional water balance. And hopefully with this new way of doing the water balance correctly, there will be no water double counting, and there is no water counting. There is no water counting. So summary and conclusions, repetition of the same thing, and the online water balance calculator, which is there. This is the calculator that you got to use in order to solve the problem. If you're doing the right thing correctly, what you need to do is read this paper, read the procedure, and then apply the calculator. It will be relatively easy. That's why I didn't have any qualms of giving it to you at the last minute, because it is the last minute. It is the last session. Okay? So thanks for that. So then we will continue on to the next effect of groundwater pumping. I think we're going to get there. Effect of groundwater pumping. Effect of groundwater pumping on the health of arid vegetative ecosystems. This was done in the year 2014. This was a report that I did for hire, by the way. Donna Tisdale hired me to do several projects. I believe it was 7 or 8. Every year she would hire me. So I don't know. I don't know how many, but it was more than 5 and less than 10. And one of them was this project, Effect of Groundwater Pumping on the Health of Arid Vegetative Ecosystems. Actually, there's 3 reports out there, 3 reports that I did for Donna that I did not include in the reading for in your class, in this class. Because, I mean, we only have limited time, right? So I didn't think that was that important. There were application issues, not basic issues. What we're going to do in here is basic, although we have case studies in here. So we also have application. So let's get into this. This is a very famous graph of the Geological Survey. We have the flow of groundwater, the water table, the capillary fringe, the Vadose zone. It's an unusual name, but it is well known. Vadose zone is the zone of unsaturated flow. It's the zone that is difficult to calculate. Because in the zone of saturation, we can apply the equations. We can solve the equations of groundwater flow as we have done numerically already, and many other people. Actually, what's done right now is people run the model that was developed, I believe, at USGS. I believe it's called MUD flow, MOD flow. Everybody runs that model. It's like HEC. HEC didn't get in that, though, by the way. I do not believe that HEC, Hydrologic Engineering Center, has a groundwater model, because people use the MUD flow, which is GS-based, Geological Survey. Why? I don't know. I don't know. One could argue that a groundwater model is not hydrology. Well, you know, I mean, you could argue that one way or the other. But the point is that HEC does not have a groundwater model, to my knowledge, and we rely on the MUD flow, which everybody uses for the last 20 years. That is the model. If you would recall, I told you the story already, that in the year 1999, we were going to develop a model, or actually we were going to use a model. And I asked my student, I said, let's buy it. How much is it? And he said it was $1,000. I said, no, we in 2-3 weeks can do this on our own. And plus we will learn. Because if you buy something, you don't learn. You learn how to use it, but you don't learn the ins and outs. And if you do it for outright, it's a little time consuming, perhaps more costly, but you learn a lot. And we were interested in learning. And I had that equation that I was willing to use at that point. Eager is the word that I was eager to use. I knew that this equation that O'Brien, Hyman, et al. presented in their paper, that procedure of averaging was going to do the work because I understood the numerics of it. So I said, Cesar, in 2, 3 weeks, we'll do this thing between you and I. And we did it exactly. Let me say it was a month of work that we did developing that model. And it's nice because we actually learned a lot from it. In our contemporary humans, human societies have learned to tap groundwater. That's about 120 years now, with pumps, of course. Human societies have pumped groundwater for 3,000 years, but now with pumps. With pumps, only 120 years. Are humans in competition with plants for the groundwater resource? Okay, wait a second. The pumps are also pumping groundwater. I'm sorry, the plants. The plants are also pumping groundwater. So if we pump groundwater, there's some major competition in there. In fact, there is. Okay. Would excessive well pumping affect the health of vegetative ecosystem, particularly in arid regions where some plants are known to rely solely on groundwater? So if plants are relying solely on groundwater and we pump the groundwater and reduce the level of the groundwater level, we are going to affect the plants. There's all sorts of fascinating stories about this, by the way. I hope I can illustrate to you a little more. Actually, let me just spend a couple of minutes on this. About 5, 6 years ago, there was a student, one of our students, and he was going to do a project. I believe it was in this class. Yeah, I had to be in this class. And I identified among the subjects the issue of how to do agriculture on non-irrigated lands. Non-irrigated lands. And this is something, a question that I posed as part of the last essay or homework, as part of the last homework. And unfortunately, many of you, if not all, misunderstood the concept of dryland agriculture. It had been stated by Van Schilfgaard, but briefly in passing. So I guess you missed it. Most of you missed it. And you understood the dryland agriculture to mean the irrigation of arid lands, which is not true. Dryland agriculture is the agriculture using or on arid lands without irrigation. Without irrigation. Okay? And the example that I'm going to talk to you is very telling. What's his name? The student. Magallon was his name. Magallon. He was a graduate student of ours. He graduated, I believe, in the year 2016. So by 2014 and 15, we were out there to look for projects, and I identified the issue of the difference between irrigated crops versus non-irrigated crops. And we went over south. We went to Mexico. Easy for us to go to Mexico. And we went all the way to the Guadalupe Valley, where they have about 60 grape growing wine producers. It's famous actually in Mexico. The Guadalupe Valley produces wines, a lot of wines. There's 60, at least 60. When I was there, it was 60. It could have been increased by now. It could increase by now. So they using, excuse me, let me drink a little water here. So they have 60 wine growers out there, wine producers, grape growers, wine producers. So we went out there and we talked to the enologist, and we introduced ourselves, and I said, Professor Ponce, San Diego State, and this gentleman is studying, and we want to see your operation. You can indicate to us what you're doing here. This was one of the larger operations, more well-known operations out there in the valley. Boy, didn't we open our eyes that day. He said, okay, fine. So he took us to the irrigated plots. Beautiful plots. Green, you would not believe. Beautiful plots, very green, a lot of photosynthesis and so forth. And it was all nice and everything. And imagine that on the left of the area, it was a large area, he was showing us these irrigated plots. And then I looked around and I saw these other plots that they were not green, they were brownish green, not as dark green and brownish. So I said to the gentleman, I said, what's that? Because obviously it was different. It was a different operation. And he said, oh, I didn't tell you that. That is the plots that we do where we do not do irrigation. I said, oh, that's fascinating. You don't do irrigation in there. And I was going to ask a lot of questions, more questions. And then he said like this, he really got me there. He says, these plots where we don't irrigate is where we get our better wines. Can you believe that? I immediately realized what he was saying. He was talking about the nutrients, not the water. Okay? And I want you to know that. And I already have given you many examples of that happening. Growth, life, plants is not just water. It's nutrients too. As a matter of fact, nutrients, in my opinion, are more important because the water is just H2O, but the nutrients are a whole lot of nutrients in the quantities in which we really technically don't have a good knowledge, right? We know a lot about how much water you should apply. That's consumptive use that's been studied for 100 years. But the issue of nutrients is relatively new. We know, but not know all we need to know. Believe me, that stuff is being discovered as we speak. Okay, even the famous drainage manual, which was done in its first edition in the year 1991. It was redone in the year 2012, and I've shown you the book, twice as big in volume. 1991, 2012, 21 years, they came up, they increased it in volume, for one thing, that's indicative, and second, they changed a lot of things. I say that because I was looking for the graphs in the second volume, and the graphs had disappeared from the first volume into the second volume because the writers of the manual felt that it was not necessary, things had changed, and so on and so forth. It's a fluid issue, the issue of nutrients in agriculture. And nutrients includes good nutrients and bad nutrients. Remember, I talked to you about that already. So we had types of water. Types of water. Distribution of earth water, we already seen that. I've talked about this extensively. This graph in here is interesting. Variation of groundwater's age with type of aquifer and depth. Confining bed. There's confining beds, clay beds. Why is that? Because geology, you don't know. I mean, these things could be 500 million years. 500 million years. I got my geologist to look at groundwater and other issues over in Ojos Negros, Professor Monty Marshall. He was a professor, he retired, but he was a professor of geology for more than 30 years over at San Diego State. I got to know, and we were friends, and I invited him to go to our project in Ojos Negros, Baja California. No, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. I invited him to go to our project in not Ojos Negros, but in Tierra del Sol. And when I got over there, I showed him the dike, the 1500 meter or feet. At this point, I don't remember, but it was 1500. You can find it in the papers that we have written. Long dike that I had never seen before. A dike. It's a geologic dike. And I asked him what the age was, because the geologists are good with ages. That's what they work on, right? Soil engineers are not good with age, geologic age. He says this stuff could be maybe 100, 150 million years. The dike that was out there. Okay, and how did it form? Well, at the time there was cracks or earthquakes, strong earthquakes, and then the whole thing came up. And this stuff is totally different material, geologic material, than the surrounding. So it's a dike. The dike is basically an intrusion of a different kind of material. Okay, so then the story, winding up or closing the story on Ensenada, is that we realized that the nutrients made a difference. Why? Why is that? Because listen to what I'm going to say, because it's very important. The crops that were irrigated didn't have to look for water. They knew that the bosses or the owners were going to come eventually and irrigate the crops. Now, you think I'm crazy? No. The plants know what they're supposed to do. if I'm the plant and somebody's coming and irrigating me every 6 days or whatever it is, the frequency, why should I go look for water, right? So basically, the plants that were irrigated had a root depth which was very much reduced to whatever was necessary for the soil to hold on to the water that was being supplied every week or so, no more. Okay, they were not forcing themselves to do anything unusual. Well, the plants that were not irrigated knew that they were not going to get the water, so they were going after the water. And there's moisture in the soil, so they were going deep in the present 2, 3, 4 times. I don't know the exact number, but it has to be that way. They were getting deeper into the ground and drawing more water and the nutrients together with the water. So they were getting a greater diversity of nutrients, which led to better wines. And how do you know one wine is better than the other? I am not the guy that says that. They are the ones that say that. But and then you can say, well, I don't see the difference, because a lot of people say I don't see the difference. Well, the difference is in the money. The ones that are irrigated sell for 10, 20 bucks. And the ones that are non-irrigated sell for $50 and even $100 a bottle. And those people are not crazy. They know some people that have money, obviously, resources, are going to go after the $100 bottle because whatever it is, I'm not a wine guy, but I can tell you that that's a fact. It's a fact. And when we went into the store, he showed us. He says, these 6 that we have in here are the run-of-the-mill wines, irrigated wines. And these are the 6 out here, bigger bottles, nicer, fancier. These are the non-irrigated. Boy, did that open our eyes. And by the way, we did a video of that. We every time we go any place, we do a video. We did a video on that. If I write it down in here, I am going to put it on the list of things that you could read. The video, the wine making. Okay, so let's keep going in here. Geology. So this paper is kind of similar to the one that we already read on the case for geomorphology. But it has a few more things in there. Geology, right? We already seen this graph in here. This graph we may not have seen before, or maybe, no, I'm sure we have, because we have many papers and they're kind of coalesce in the issues of commonality. So the timing response of fractured rock aquifers may be measured in days and months, while that of an alluvial aquifer may be measured in years and decades. Why? Because the water flows through these cracks. The water flows through these cracks. This is in the Mccain Valley, but in the Tierra del Sol Valley, the same thing. The rocks that are outcropping on the surface, they all have cracks, which gives us the idea that the cracks are everywhere below the ground. Obviously, it has to be that way. How come? Because this is rock, and that is an earthquake region. The earthquake region starts at around San Francisco. It moves south. It gets to a place called Upland, in northeast of, east is actually north, a little bit north of Pasadena. If you guys been out there, Pasadena, Arcadia, those towns out there, there's many towns out there, eastern LA. And there's a town out there called Upland, which abuts with the hills, with the hills. I don't remember the name right now, but there's hills, they're mountains. The geologists say that those mountains are going up at about 1 millimeter per year, which is some of the highest rates of uplift in the United States, 1 millimeter per year. Okay, and that's why there's a lot of erosion, and that's the reason why they have this town called Upland, which is formed in a debris flow. Debris flow many years ago, and the entire town is in the debris flow. Never mind that if they have another debris flow, the town is going to be messed up. They chose to do that, or perhaps they didn't know at the time they were doing this. Every once in a while, like maybe 20, 30 years, they have problems out there with debris flows and stuff like that. Okay, I think I've already shown these pictures in various papers. This is a large spring in Mccain Valley. It is fascinating to find a spring in an arid land, because it kind of it reminds us that there's water down there. You can't see it, but if it comes out on the surface, then it's there. In the Mccain Valley, does have a reservoir, which at this point I don't know how they're faring, by the way, because if they pump in the vicinity, the reservoir is going to be gone. That's the first thing that happens. But at that time when we did this, I believe in the year 2014, the spring was there. So we were able to take a picture. How do I know that that's a spring? How can I say there's a spring? Well, I mean, you can see the bubbling of the water in the neighborhood. I wish I could have had a video at that point, because that's the only way you can see the bubbling. But that is definitely a spring in the Mccain Valley. There's also the issue, and this is something that we studied purposely and correctly, by the way, the issue about upland versus riparian interaction between groundwater and vegetation. The riparian is over here. This is an infrared, which shows red, all the green. The green shows in red color. This is the infrared that shows in here the riparian vegetations. These are coast live oak over here. And why are there? Because this is a channel. Actually it's an ephemeral river channel, an ephemeral stream channel coming from here, draining the upland. This is the upland because the top of the watershed is around in this area, out here somewhere. Okay, this is going south into Mexico, and over here on the left is going into Campo, which eventually goes into Mexico too. Don't forget the Mexican border is right there. The Mexican border is right here. Okay, this is the U.S., but this is Mexico over here. Okay, so these red trees in here, or trees painted in red or shown in red, is called riparian vegetation. But this one is not riparian. This is in the upland. There's a difference in elevation, which I estimate between maybe 100 or 150 feet between here and here. This is the river, and this is not the river. This is the mountain, the hill, the upland, and yet you have green in there. Why is that? Because of the lineament. That is a large, albeit unusual, large lineament, meaning a line that is drawing water from the ground. It's a crack, big crack in the ground. Okay? Now it turns out, and I believe I have discussed this before, but maybe not, because we covered a lot of ground. What happens is this: different types of vegetation accommodate or associate with different quantities of water. And among the chaparral vegetation, which populates this whole area here in Southern California and northern Baja California, there are several types of chaparral. But in here, we notice that there's two types. The chamis, which is over here, there's little dots in here, they're the chamis. And then the red chank. The red chank's over here. The red chank is a lot taller. The chamis is about 10 feet. And the red chank can get up to 25 feet tall. So these are tall shrubs, almost tree-like shrubs. Now, it goes without saying, the more water they have, the taller they get. I mean, that is a well-known fact. We know that the trees in Northern California, in the corner, the triangle out there, can rise up to 250 feet. It's about 80 meters. While the Amazon trees, the canopy of the Amazon is about 60 meters. So these trees are higher and even larger than the Amazon trees. We thought the Amazon was the wettest. No, that's not true. They're wet, but they're not the wettest. The rain in the Amazon is 3,200 millimeters average, while the rain up in Northern California can get all the way up to 4,800 millimeters. That's 1.5 times. So then we justify what we see in the field. Geomorphology, we already talked about that. I want to talk about this, by the way. Figure 11 shows the vegetational gradient across a cross-section of the Mojave River, Camp Katy, California. This is from Mainzer, by the way, our famous friend Mainzer. It is seen that different species occupy different levels in the profile. We have ordinary desert, saltgrass and mesquite, the second terrace. On the first terrace, saltwater, mesquite, and willows. Willows is a wetter plant. And then poplar, willow, and mesquite. Poplar is much wetter even, because they're in the floodplain. Ordinary desert. So you can see the elevation already depicts what vegetation is gonna have. It's gonna show in there, because the plants know what they want. I've seen cases, more than 30 years. I've seen cases of vegetation responding to the availability of water. Actually, vegetation fighting. You think I'm crazy? No. different stands of vegetation fight for the place to be where they want to be. And we believe we have a video on that, by the way. And I'm not sure if I have shown you, but I've shown the video, but I'm going to write it down. It's the video on the Red Clover Creek. I'm not sure if I showed it to you. We have a video on Red Clover Creek that precisely shows that issue of the vegetation, different types of vegetation fighting for the space because they like it. They like that place and they eventually take it. Over here, vegetational gradient in the Savannah woodlands of Mato Grosso. I visited Mato Grosso many times when I was doing the Pantanal, not just the Pantanal, but also Mato Grosso, which is not the same. But we were able to take this picture. This is our picture. Vegetational gradient in the Savannah woodlands of Mato Grosso. I am given to understand that this kind of stuff happens all over the world, by the way, but it has to have the right hydrology and geomorphology. Over here you have the riparian, which is very dark green. And over here you have the so-called cerrado. It's a shrub-like vegetation, arid land, 400, 500 millimeters. The cerrado is 5 to 600 millimeters. It's semi-arid. Okay, in the middle, you don't have the cerrado, nor you have the riparian. So what's going on in here? Okay, and the answer is in here you have a lot of water right next to the river. The river is underground. Rivers is always there. If you have a depression, there's a river, but it's underground, below ground. So even if it's ephemeral or intermittent or whatever, there's moisture in there. So these green, dark green trees benefit from it. Where there's no water, only the amount that rains, then you have the cerrado. And here in the middle, we have grass. What's happening in here? And the answer is this. Listen to what I'm going to say. That here they not only issue the quantity, but also the history of the vegetation, the fluctuations. In here you have permanent water. In here you have permanent dryness. And in the middle you have seasonal, fluctuating moisture coming and going because of the floodplain. There's a floodplain in here. And the shrubs, or rather the grass, is the only type of vegetation that can adjust or can adapt to fluctuations. Fascinating, isn't it? So fluctuating water over here, dry water over here, or dry terrain over here, and wet terrain over here. That's what we call a vegetational gradient. Hydrology, we already know this, we've seen this, so I'm not going to go over it. The Amazon, 51% of the flow flows out of the Amazon at Obidos, 51%. That's very large. Remember, I think I've said before, 40% is the average, and even 40% is considered to be a high average. A lot of people say it's only 35 or 33%, but yet the Amazon has 51% because it's large. There's a few rivers out there with larger runoff coefficient than the Amazon, but they're not that many, by the way. Besides, I haven't seen all the rivers in the world. I can't tell you. Like I said, I've seen rivers in maybe about 20 countries at the most, and there's 240 countries out there. This is a fascinating picture. This is in Tierra del Sol. This is a riparian forest of coast live oak. There's a coast live oak out there. These trees are 100 years old. But you can see they don't populate the river. They populate the fringes of the river where they are more comfortable. And they're there and they survive because there's water down there. If you start digging in there, water probably a couple, 3 feet. Yeah, that's it. That's what we call an ephemeral river. This is a picture from, I believe, from the paper that we quoted earlier, USGS water supply paper, I think so, which shows the cut bank of the Santa Cruz River near Tucson, Arizona, showing the deep roots of mesquite. The mesquite. The mesquite is a phreatophyte. As a matter of fact, we were just doing a video on this subject, and we were looking for a picture of mesquite to show the mesquite, a typical phreatophyte in Arizona. And we found it. There's a whole lot. I mean, the web is really good. Google is really good. Actually, without Google, we probably couldn't do what we're doing right now because it would take us too long. It would be too costly to do. But Google simplifies that because it gives you all the information from everybody that would like to share it. And a lot of people just post stuff to share. That's good. Okay, ecology. Desert in the balance of Rio Grande. So look at this. This is an interesting picture. How dry it is. This is called a serido out there. It's a local name for for the cactus-driven or cactus-populated. In cactus, and there's a whole lot of outcrops out here. Look, cactus, and this is kind of a relatively new geology. But right next to it, there's a river. It is green. So it's the same thing that we talked about earlier. Different moisture gradients produce produce different kinds of vegetation. The greenery is not going to come over here because it's dry. And these guys are not going to go over there because they don't like too much water. The cactus typically likes 400, 500 millimeters. And here we get this huge montane forest, cloud forest, as a matter of fact. This is, I believe, in, where did we get this? This is in Zamora Chinchipe. This is a forest. It rains 3,000 millimeters over there. This is in eastern Ecuador. And there's mountains over there because it's not quite, although it's eastern Ecuador, it's not quite the jungle, the Amazon jungle. It's in between. It's a transition to the jungle, wet enough to produce these tall trees. As you can see, these trees are not that big, but they're tall and they're dense, but not that big. I can see that those trees are not that big. Okay, they're not like the trees in Northern California, which are huge. Hydroecology, we already know that. The tallest trees with horizontal precipitation, right? We already know the horizontal precipitation issues. The addition of horizontal precipitation to vertical precipitation, which comes from the condensation under the proper climatic conditions, the condensation of moisture. And the moisture is coming from somewhere nearby supply, like the ocean. So typically these types of situations are in proximity, maybe not exactly on the ocean or on the coast, but within reason. Okay, I've seen it in many places. In Peru, in the department of Lambayeque in the north, there's a few places where they have these cloud forests. So it looks like the Amazon, even though it's not supposed to rain that much. The same thing that happened in Ecuador, by the way. And I'm telling you in these countries because that's where my experience has been. I'm sure that there's places out there in Louisiana or somewhere out there where these things may happen. I don't know. I cannot talk about it. The widest tree in the world. This is the widest tree in the world. Mm-hmm. This is in Oaxaca. Now, Oaxaca is typically dry. So what is this large tree doing in Oaxaca? Actually, Oaxaca is not typically dry. Oaxaca is semi-arid bordering in humid. Oaxaca precipitation varies, of course, but it varies between 600, 700, perhaps even 800 in the hills. So it's right there. It's got enough moisture. Okay. What happens with this tree over here is that it is right below and right next to two hills, large hills. For Oaxaca, they're large hills. And these large hills, it rains and the rain comes down, similar to what happened in Mccain Valley. This tree is being supplied by groundwater from two strategic locations on the left and on the right. And that is why it has grown in the last couple thousand years, they say, to being the largest tree in the world. As a matter of fact, I went over to Google Earth and did this. Here are the two hills that I'm talking about. This is the hill on the left, and this is the hill on the right. And the tree is over here. Can you see that in the middle? And there's not a whole lot of water in here because if this were have surface water, this would be green, but it isn't. So I'm given to understand that the precipitation over here is on the order of 400, but not over here. Can you see that? It does vary. Okay, so that explains the flows, the groundwater, the surface water. It explains actually everything. The deserts, another, this is USGS 497. Relation between height of mesquite and depth to water table, Coachella Valley. Fascinating picture. The size of the mesquite depends on the proximity to the water. The farther from the water, if it's on a hill, it was shorter. If it's close to the water, it's larger. Does not that repeat to what I just said earlier? The availability of water in control there. Okay. Aerial view of the linear forest, outer linear forest. This, I say outer linear forest, I kind of appropriated it. It was Donna Tisdale's because she's the one that showed it to me and taught me a lot by practicing there. How could I know? I had not been there prior to being engaged in that work. But then eventually I went there. Oh, I've been going every month out there for 7 years, so I know my way around out there. But the point is that the linear forest of red shank, we featured it in one of our papers and so on and so forth. And over here, this is a close view of the linear forest. Red shank. That tree is called red shank because it's kind of reddish. The stem is kind of reddish, right? And it's tall. It's about 20 to 25 feet. And it's still a shrub. Actually, you can't really classify this as a shrub or a tree. Actually, it is a shrub. Botanically, it's a shrub because it has a lot of, the stems are going in all kinds of directions, okay? I'm not a botanist, but let me just stop there. I run into trouble here. But this is a shrub, but it is a large shrub. It's an unusual shrub. This kind of shrub occupies only about 3 to 5% of, in the areas, I believe the number is 3%. 3% of the chaparral is this chaparral. That means that it is only in the places where, geomorphologically speaking, or geologically speaking, because this one has nothing to do with geomorphology, it has to do with geology, which is kind of paired together. Okay, so these two represent the issues of geology, geomorphology, moisture, ecology, which of course we specialize. You see, we cross the borders of we have for the last 30 years been crossing the borders between these sciences. The lone specimen of Coast Live Oak, that's another story. This is downstream of the huge dike. There's a big tree over there that is not supposed to be there in terms of its size. It's too big to be there. Why is it there? Because there's a spring right next to it. We know that it is a spring because it's wet over here. And people that live there, I believe this is Donna's ranch, Donna Tisdale's. They have put a tub over there so they can collect the water for the animals. How fascinating. And over here is our large dike that I had talked about earlier. Okay, hydrogeology, we already looked at this. The issue of settlement with pumping. These two pictures are two pictures taken in Las Vegas, Nevada, showing evidence of land subsidence. Is the land going to subside when you pump a whole lot? For sure. The Central Valley has been subsiding for the last 20, 30, 40 years. As a matter of fact, these subjects are being discussed currently. I just read a paper, I believe, where was it? Somebody sent it to me or I read it in the paper, whatever, in the last few days. The state of California and the various agencies in the Central Valley are going to spend millions of dollars, on the order of billions actually, to redo some of the canals that flow from north to south. Redo some of the canals that take water from north to south, the lifeblood of the South, Southern California. We're going to redo them. Aren't they okay? They were built 40, 50, 60 years ago. There's no problem with the age. The problem is the groundwater pumping, which is settling and taking them out of alignment, and they no longer can transport water because the water has to flow by gravity, right? So as you can see, these issues are serious, very serious issues. But in fashion, which I don't particularly agree with, instead of looking at the causes, they're looking at the effects. They're going to go rebuild the canals. So what happened? In 20, 30 more years, they're going to continue pumping and they're going to have to redo it again. There is no question in my mind that that's going to happen. It takes time because these problems did not start yesterday. They've been pumping for 50 years out there in the Central Valley. Aquifers, we already know that stuff, the aquifers and so forth. I'm going to be running out of time. I'm going to be wrapping this up. This is a very nice picture that we wrote. Jacamba, this is the community well in Jacamba. In Jacamba, they provide surface water, the water from groundwater. There's a community well. Oh, Jacamba. I don't know if you guys have been out there. Jacamba is almost on the border, actually on the border. When you're in Jacamba, you can see the fence, the Mexican, the limit between the US. It's a big fence out there in Jacamba. So the Jacamba, this is where Jacamba gets their water. I should tell you that in the earthquake of the year 2010, I believe it was April 4th, this well went artesian for about 2 weeks. Isn't that fascinating? I think it is. I don't know if you guys, but for me it is. All of a sudden after the earthquake, or during and after the earthquake, it went artesian. But it did not go artesian for a long time. It was 2 weeks. That was a long time, actually. Meaning water started popping out there without any pumping. And the reason for, of course, is because below ground, the cracks realigned themselves with the earthquake. And God knows how deep would that be. And they created some zones of pressure, and the well became artesian. As you can see, everything that we have said is correct. Okay. In the Heat Ranch over in Tierra del Sol, there's this box spring. What is a box spring? A box spring is a place where the groundwater is very close, so close to the surface that we can box with concrete. You can do a concrete box, and you get access to the water. And that's exactly what happens in the Heat Ranch. The Heat Ranch is in the vicinity of where Donna Tisdale lives, within half a mile. And Donna said to me, Professor Ponce, you want to go see a box spring? Because I was asking her about that. And we went to this Heat Ranch, which is a neighbor, and he showed it to us. I took a picture. There's water there, right there. You can almost see it. It's kind of dark, but there's water. And finally, the case studies. We do not have the time. We only have 4 minutes, but I'm just going to name them. I'm going to talk. I would like you to read this, by the way. This 11 case studies is very important. I want you to read this paper. It will be questions out of this particular paper and the previous one that we covered today. They will be on the reading list. Santa Cruz River. What happened in Santa Cruz River? In 1942, you had a narrow channel. 1969 or 89, 47 years later, after pumping extreme values of pumping to feed the city of Tucson, to give water to the city of Tucson, which was developing at that time, the vegetation drought, it died, the vegetation died, and the river took over, and it widened itself from I believe, from 300 feet to 1,000 feet. Yeah, it's about 300 meters over here. Okay, that's Arizona. In Mexico, the Ojos Negros Valley, we studied this valley for 7 years, and we are not going to have a chance due to short time to read that report. And I'm not going to ask you to read the report. You're certainly welcome to read it in your free time, but I'm not going to ask you questions about it because obviously we didn't cover it. But what happened was that they call it Ojos Negros because there were two little cienagas or lakes out there in the year 1864. Can you believe 1864 over here? Year 1864. And then 100 years later, they dried out. They disappeared. They're no longer there. The town is still called Ojos Negros because people don't know that that's the history. And besides, even if they knew, what are they going to do? Change the name? But the point is that they were not there. So in the year 1970 and 1999 and 2000, when I was doing this study, I took my friend, the geologist, Monty Marshall. I said, Monty, let's go out there for a weekend. And we went out there, spent a weekend over at Ojos Negros, and we hired somebody to dig some holes in the presumed places, which I knew they were, where these two cienagas were. And I wanted to see whether, in fact, the soil was dark. If the soil was dark, it revealed ciénaga. If the soil was brown, there was no ciénagas, and somebody told us a story. And that's the fact is we found we found the dark soil in there, and they were confirmed by the geologists. This is called soil chemistry and soil physics, soil chemistry, actually. So we confirmed that, in fact, there was a place out there. We actually were lucky to hit it at the right place. If we had hit it somewhere else, but the issue was geomorphology. Again, we knew that was a depression. So we dug into depression. Okay, Ash Creek, I already talked about Ash Creek. I'm not going to dwell on that today. Thompson Creek, I honestly don't really want to talk too much about Thompson Creek, but so be it. In here, we have a map, okay, and we have the confluence of Thompson Creek with Sycamore Creek over here, and there is a golf operation over here. I don't want to mention names, but there's a golf field over here, extensive golf field, which is pumping a whole lot of water. Okay, so we simulated, and actually we looked for the USGS, and if you look at the USGS in here, it says spring over here. Can you see that? Spring. So we went over there and tried to look for the spring, and it was not there. The spring had disappeared. And this map is 40 years old. So we're given to understand that there was springs over there before they started pumping. 20, 30 years later, after a lot of pumping, the springs dried out. There it is. There it is. We took a picture. The spring on there. Okay. And finally, Tierra del Sol. I already covered this, so I'm going to finish in here. I will exceeded my time over here. This is the basin of Tierra del Sol. The groundwater basin, I mean now basin, the watershed. So it flows, it is a headwater, and it flows over here, flows in here, and it gets into Mexico over here, at this place called Aguaje del Nat on the other side of the border. Over here, there's a different different watershed. This goes to Campo Creek. It goes in this direction, into Campo Creek. Never mind, Campo Creek goes through Campo in the U.S. Next to the border, and then it goes into Mexico. To Mexico to form a river that is called I don't remember right now, but I showed you the pictures, or maybe another. I didn't show you the pictures, but it goes into Mexico, then it runs over through Mexico, forms the Tecate Creek, and then it goes back to the United States, and ends up it flows into the ocean in Pacific Beach. No, I'm sorry, not Pacific Beach. What is it called? The city south. God, I forget. But the furthermost city here in San Diego County, whatever it is, it flows in there. The Tijuana River outlets into the Pacific Ocean north of the border, even though it runs through Tijuana. It runs through the entire town of Tijuana, the Alamar, the Tijuana. They're all rivers of Tijuana. So I'm going to stop there, and that's basically it. So I'm going to send you the information on the recommended list as late as tomorrow, either tonight or tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to do that tonight. And good luck on your presentation. That's Tuesday and Thursday next week. And the exam, I believe, is the following week. I believe the 16 rings a bell. It's the Thursday. So today is Thursday, right? Today is the second, right? So 16, it's the 16th. The 16th is the exam from 3:30 to 5:30. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.